What's going on, guys? Captain Cody Davis here, back again for another episode of Tight Splice Charters. Obviously not out on the lake today, just sitting here at the bar at the house, and wanted to take a minute to go over a topic that I get asked about a ton, whether it's in the comment sections or a lot of you reach out to me, just send me a message, text to my phone, just asking what I would do in this situation that they're encountering, how I would adapt and adjust. And I get a lot of customers that are locals that book me just to see what adjustments I make and how I adapt to this situation while out on the lake, because it frustrates them and it is confusing and overwhelming. And really the topic we're going to talk about is how to adjust and adapt to severe weather changes while out on Lake Okeechobee. Right? It happens all the time. You find a big group of fish, the weather changes in some way, whether it gets super windy, right? Whether it gets super cold, whether it gets hot too quick. And just people want to know about how I think the fish move, how they behave, and stuff like that. And I don't know everything, I'm far from it, but there's certain things I do that help me out, and there's a certain way I look at things, which may be wrong, may be right, but I feel like it works for me and I'm confident in it. And it just makes it a little bit easier, and maybe I'll say something in this rant here that makes sense to some of you that'll help you out. So, first and foremost, I truly think our bass here on Lake Okeechobee move way, way more than pretty much any other bass on any other body of water throughout the country, aside from, say, the Great Lakes and smallmouth up there, right? I mean, those are literally inland oceans, they're deep. Those fish are just roaming. And Florida bass are a weird deal, okay? They're totally opposite, and I say this a lot to a lot of people, where you could watch, and I explain this to my customers all the time that come in from out of town. You could watch any seminar you want by any pro, anything, talking about spring fishing, talking about fishing a jig, talking about worm fishing, and they'll give you a 3-hour seminar of highly detailed information. 9 times out of 10, if you listen to the whole 2.5-hour spiel, somewhere in there you're gonna hear that pro leave the little comment, aside from Florida, unless you're in Florida. Because Florida has its own playbook, because Florida obviously has Florida bass. Florida bass, they're their own gene of fish. They behave totally different, almost completely opposite from all the other bass in the country. It just goes on for, literally, especially on Lake Okeechobee, when it gets cold, all your guys, if you're watching this from out of state, all your fish go out deep, our fish come in shallow. Your guys' fish spawn for 2 weeks out of the year, our fish literally spawn from October to May. You guys have 2 waves of fish come in on your lake, we have 60. They just behave, they're so sensitive. If our water temperature down here drops 2 degrees, that's the equivalent to your guys' water dropping 10, and that's no exaggeration. They behave different, they react to their environment totally different. They're aggressive, but very fragile and lethargic at the same time. So they're just a totally different bird to think about at the end of the day. And people kind of struggle with it, and especially out here on the lake. So like I said, so they move a lot. They're a totally different type of fish that you're fishing for. And but with that being said, about these bass moving a lot with weather changes or whatever makes them move, there's a lot of times where I think people will be like, oh, I found these fish, but the weather changed and I went back or went out 100 yards and found them again, they moved. I think 50% of the time that's true, but the other 50% of the time, I think you literally rolled in on another group of fish that you didn't even know was there or anyone knew was there. And those fish started biting because wherever they were, the weather change might have hurt this group of fish, but it really helped this area. Because at the end of the day, another thing I try to tell people on this lake, you're not looking for fish. If you drop your boat into Roland Martin's Marina, turn the key, you aft off the ramp, you could drop your trolling motor right there in the basin and have a chance of catching 20 pounds. You can catch them in the Clewiston Channel. You can catch them in the Harney Pond Canal. You can catch them at the bridge in the river. You can catch them in the Slims Basin. There's bass everywhere in this lake, everywhere. So you're not looking for fish. You're on fish as soon as you put your boat in this lake. You're looking for fish that are set up to be catchable. And And that's one thing you always got to remember out here. You know, there's certain things you're looking for, and your catchable fish might be different than John Smith's catchable fish, might be different than Breezy's catchable fish, because we're all different fishermen. We all like to do things a certain way. We're all looking for certain things and certain ingredients to have a successful day out there. So, you know, I'm just going to go through a couple of scenarios that happen every 4 days and just little adjustments, how I look at it that makes sense to me. And we'll start with, I don't know. Okay, so we'll start with like a swim jig in the back, right? So a lot of our fish are spawning right now, and there's a lot of time. The biggest misconception you'll get on this lake, and I don't care who you listen to, they're all gonna tell you the same thing. You have to find clean water to catch big bass on Okeechobee or in Florida in general, and that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Does it help? Yes, sometimes, but there's certain things that happen. If you're in a backwater area, okay, far in the back, and let's just say the water drops, it gets mudded out because of boat pressure. Say you're in a 1 acre field, okay, hay field, dollar pad field, what have you, and there's 25 boats in there throughout the day, and you go in there and it's just mudded up from boat pressure, people running their trolling motors, kicking stuff up, and it gets muddy. Or maybe there's a maybe where you're fishing, the wind's blowing from the back, okay, which typically means it's going to blow water from the bank out. It's going to come through the marsh and out to where you're fishing. It's going to typically blow clean water in. Well, let's just say there were airboaters back there spraying and rooting and just doing donuts, or something happened in the back and it blows muddy water into your spawning area. Okay, that could hurt that bite. All right, so let's just say you're back there catching them on a brim colored swim jig like I have here. Very effective bait, works great. And all of a sudden you go back there 3 days later and it's muddy. You look at the wind, it's been blowing. Let's just say you're fishing in Turner's Cove, which is basically just north of Clewiston on the west side of the lake, and you look back and it's been blowing out of the west for 3 days. You're like, man, it should be clean, but for some reason it just blew mud into here from the backwater, which does happen. Not often, but it does happen. That can mess you up. But there's other times where maybe you go back there and the water's not muddy, but it's dirtier than it's been. I mean, the visibility is very low, but it's been blowing in from the east, and you start seeing some flicks on top of the water, and this happens all the time. People walk in there and they think, oh, well, my water's shot, it's disgusting, it's dirty, I need to leave. Hang out for a little bit. A lot of times you only need 2 or 3 inches of visibility to catch them, right? And maybe this is not your weapon of choice anymore. Maybe you don't want to throw that brim colored swim jig anymore. Maybe you put this in the water and 2 inches down you lose sight of it, but maybe you put this white one on and you could see it 5 inches down, right? So it shows up better in the water. And 9 times out of 10 in that situation, if it's blowing out of the east, so it's blowing water in from the main lake, and you say, okay, I've got 4 or 5 inches of visibility here. It's not totally mudded out, it's dirty, what I would consider dirty, but it's fishable. A lot of times the wind's gonna blow in shad, right? We don't have current, we don't have tide on our lake. All of our bait, when I'm referring to bait, I'm referring to shad, is moved around with the wind. Okay, so that wind's gonna blow in off that main lake, blow those shad into there. And now a lot of times what happens is that fish's forage change. They're back there eating bluegill and brim and shiners and gin clear water. And then all of a sudden the wind switches directions, it's blowing bait to them, creates a current. Yeah, it's dirty, but now maybe they're not spawning anymore. A lot of times those fish will set up more towards the outside of that hay field or that dollar pad field, right? And so the current and the bait's coming right in their face, and you can just make the adjustment and throw white. I've had so many instances where I'm fishing a community hole and I roll in there the first or second day it blows in and everyone's leaving. They're like, oh, it's getting dirty, and just hammer them on a white swim jig or a spinner bait or a white chatterbait, some kind of shad imitating bait. Now, maybe after 3 or 4 days, yes, then it may get unfishable and get too dirty. Then you got to get out of there. But don't be fooled by just a little bit of dirty water. I mean, don't be scared to fish it. So that's one thing that I do, and we catch the heck out of them on a white swim jig, and we'll literally catch them. We can catch 100 fish on this on Tuesday, and Thursday we're catching them on this, and then sometimes, you know, after maybe by Saturday, if it's still blowing out that direction, like I said, it won't be fishable in there anymore, and you got to go. But people see some dirty water, which means like they can't see the bottom and get scared when they come down here, nonsense. They're in there. They don't leave that quick. So that's a little adjustment there. Another thing that can happen, let's just say like, say you're in a protected area, all right, and it's a day like today, and you're catching them, it's 78, 85 degrees, cloudy, summertime, feels like summertime fishing. Maybe it's in November, maybe it's in February, maybe it's in March. It's hot, you got wind blowing out of the south, but you're in a protected area. You're in the way in the back, fishing dollar pads, needle grass, again, same kind of thing. Maybe you got some submerged eelgrass and hydrilla in there, and you are just crushing them on a frog, right? This is a white popping frog. This isn't typically what I would use, but let's just say you're using a black or a natural colored popping frog, and a cold front hits, right? So you're down here practicing, you're catching them on a frog, cold front hits, you go back the next day, maybe you're in a protected area, so the wind's not gonna affect you, but the air temperature dropped 25 degrees, the water temperature dropped 10 degrees, and it's bluebird skies. Most of the time when it's bluebird, they will not hit the frog. It's just not the deal. And don't ask me why, because none of this makes sense whatsoever. But a lot of times you can buzz that big easy over their head and they'll come up and kamikaze this thing. They won't touch this popping on top, but they'll touch this ripping across the top like a whopper plopper or a buzzbait. Not sure why, but that's an adjustment I make a lot. And then if you're in an area like that where it is really windy, right? You're in a backwater area, it's windy enough that it's making it a pain in the ass to fish, but it's not dirtying your water. Swim jig. Maybe not white. If the water's still really clean, you're not going to want to throw white. You're going to want to throw something natural, like a whatever color this is, sunfish color, right? I do better on swim jigs in the wind. So if I was catching them on a slick, calm, hot, muggy day on the frog, and then I go in there, okay, let's start throwing this, and maybe they don't want to come up top and eat this buzzing on top, getting a reaction bite, I'll swim this swim jig through there. A lot of times those fish don't have a reason to leave, right? If it gets cold, but it's still stable, right? If anything, it's going to help especially if the wind's blowing. It's blowing current in there. It's going to make them feed. Or if there is no wind and it just drops and gets cold, a lot of times those fish are still there. They're just going to be a little bit more lethargic. So instead of them kind of just studying this frog coming over their head and them coming up and eating it, you got to make them react. So buzzing a swim bait over the top of their head definitely gets a lot of bites, even in the cold weather. I don't know why. It makes no sense. You got to eat it on top either way, but the Big Easy is definitely a bite getter when it comes to that. Another thing, flipping, one of my favorites. So this time of year, from October to early March, this is like all I flip. All right, this is an ugly otter, but any type of beaver style bait, I mean a plastic, a burner craw, a beaver, the missile D-bomb, this is an ugly otter. Any kind of smaller profile like this is the deal for me, right? So water temperatures below 73 or so, this is what I have on, and typically this time of year it's always going to be low. It's a smaller profile, and a lot of times you could sneak this thing in there and you're going to get bites. Now my favorite is to flip the jig, but this is March, April, May, June, July, August into September and October. I kind of put it away because the water temperatures are up, and as opposed to everywhere else in the country where a jig is meant to look like a crawfish of some sort, you're trying to make this look like a brim or a bluegill. Our fish, these big rogue fish that are up there eating spawning bluegill, typically don't get into bluegill mode until the water gets hot. So I typically fish this guy, but let's just say I'm fishing this, and not that a 9-pounder won't eat a beaver, they do all the time, but it's just a smaller profile, will get you a little bit more bites, and I just have more confidence in it. But something I will do is sometimes I'm fishing some isolated reeds, kind of sparse reeds, Kissimmee grass, something like that. Again, the weather might come through and make it muddy. There's times where you'll go back to that area and you're like, okay, it's too muddy to fish. It's unfishable. But maybe 2 days later, maybe it's starting to clean up, right? You get out there like, man, it's almost there. I mean, I could flip this thing in there and I lose it after like 3 inches. I wish it was just a tad bit cleaner. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll switch to the jig. And the reason I'll do that is because this gives off a bigger profile and they can see it better than this in that dirty water. You know, a lot of times after a post front, it might blow 25 mile an hour, dirty everything up, but 2 or 3 days after, it's gonna slick out and it's gonna start cleaning up pretty quickly. So you're on a warming trend typically at that point anyway. So the fish are looking to feed. They are a little bit more aggressive, but they gotta be able to see the bait to eat it. So there's been a lot of times where people leave the flipping area because they've been flipping a beaver and, well, it's still too dirty. You know, today's Saturday, Monday it'll be fishable. Well, I've snuck in there with a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce jig, and I'm not saying I'm gonna light the world on fire, but sometimes where you can't get a bite on this, you might be able to go through that stretch and get a bite or 2 or 4 or 5 on the jig. Just because if you could see this 2 inches down, sometimes you can see this 3.5 inches down. And just that little bit more visibility. It's bulkier, it's darker. I always flip black and blue or June bug, something dark and black. And I'll usually use something that just gives off, you know, I'm not real big on them feeling the kickers going down on a burner cross or a rage crawl like everyone uses. I more or less want them to see it. So another thing I'll do in that case is instead of flipping every 3 feet to a point in the Kissimmee grass or the reeds, you gotta make more flips, and you gotta make your flips a lot closer together at that point. One, like I said, they're gonna want to eat, but they're coming off of a front a lot of times if we had heavy wind, or even if it's in the summertime. But they got beat up. The weather just beat them up. You got to hit them in the face with it. So slow down, make a lot more flips, and use something with some bulk. Or if you're a punch skirt person, put a punch skirt on there. Anything that's just gonna give it. That makes it a little bit easier for them to see. Has made a big difference for me. Now, this is another one, kind of speaking kind of with all of this stuff. You know, a lot of times the fish, they will move. You know, if you're catching fish out on the outside edge of the lake, flipping, right? Let's just say you find them in practice flipping the outside edge, and 2 days later, tournament morning, it's blowing 20 and you're getting those swells, right, in your reeds. I think you can listen to a lot of different pros. No one likes flipping grass in the wind because I just don't think those bass like that grass bumping up against them and all that. It just doesn't work. This is where I think sometimes you run into different groups of fish. Do those fish leave out of that grass? They might. They very well might. They might go out in the lake though. They may go out there where there's no grass touching them. But a lot of times what'll happen is if you're out there on the outside edge, you come in 100 yards to another strip of grass, those fish are biting, they're on fire. And a lot of times it's because it's blowing, it's just protected enough to where the waves aren't beating it up and the muddy water hasn't got there yet, but that wind's blowing in there, creating a current, again, bringing shad and other types of bait into that grass that they haven't had in a week or a few days or whatever, and they're more prone to eat. Scoot back a little bit. Sometimes, you know, it's a confidence thing for me, but sometimes I think if you had fish here and it's too rough to fish there, go in to where it's just fishable, to where you're comfortable and can fish slowly and efficiently. And either whichever one it is, whether those fish scooted back or the fish that are right there have been there the whole time and now they're just starting to fire up. Either way, you can't fish for the fish you had anyway. So scoot back, you know you're around fish, you know you're gonna guess your fish came back there, and even if they didn't, you know, you were close, you're in a good area, you're in a effective area. Fish it like that. And again, if you caught them flipping, maybe make an adjustment and throw a white swim jig or something. Now if you can't go out there and catch them flipping, it's probably because it's too windy, it's too rough. The waves are coming in there, it's blowing bait in there. Maybe you switch to a spinner bait, maybe you switch to a chatterbait or a swim jig. Hit them with something moving. Another thing that's been happening a ton here lately is a lot of people have been fishing a chatterbait. You get to your area, you're catching them in submerged eelgrass or hydrilla, and all of a sudden, oh, it's blown out. It's rough, and there's just chopped grass everywhere, right? Maybe between all the boats, the wind spinning around, you cannot work a chatterbait through the boat trail or whatever you're doing, simply because every cast you're getting chopped grass on your hook. It's a pain in the ass. We've all been there. A lot of people just leave. All you got to do, this is going to sound really stupid, but this burner worm is the exact same thing as this chatterbait. You can put a 1/4 ounce weight on this burner worm, make a long cast on 20-pound fluoro, just where you would with this. And what you're trying to do with this chatterbait, yes, this has more vibration, but you're trying to get it hung and rip it out of the grass and get that reaction bite. You can do the exact same thing with this burner worm. Throw it out, literally just straight crank it, use a heavy weight so that it gets stuck. And every time it gets stuck, pop it out. You're not gonna get any chopped grass on your hook. It's a little bit of a bigger profile, and sometimes it's a little more subtle. And you 9 times out of 10, you can catch those same fish. On the flip side of that, there's a lot of times where I've gone behind boats throwing a chatterbait, throwing this guy because it doesn't give off as much vibration. Maybe they're really conditioned to the chatterbait. And you can catch yourself not only a big fish, but a bunch of them. So those are just some tips. You know, I mean, trust me, I have not mastered this lake. I'm on it every single day. And I mean, I'll tell you right now, I've been struggling as of lately. It's very tough. Our fish move, our fish are pressured 365 days a year. A lot of you watching this throughout the country, you guys' lakes may only get fished for 6 months out of the year. We're hit 365, hundreds of boats on this lake every day, and it still pushes them out. And at the end of the day, we're never gonna catch even 1% of what lives in here. Like I said, all those fish live out in the middle. We're just catching what comes in, gets lost, and sets up in the grass, and just learning what to do and what moves to make. And this is just a handful of little things, but you got to just use your head when you're out there. You know, I mean, you're on Lake Okeechobee. There's bass every 10 feet in this lake. And like I said in the beginning, even if your fish gets shut down or something happens, you got to be able to make adjustments. You got to have confidence that you're always around fish, because you are. And you just got to look for what you feel comfortable fishing and what looks good to you. If it looks good to you, 9 times out of 10, there's bass there. It's just figuring out that deal, how to catch them, when they're gonna bite, if they're gonna bite at a certain time, and what they're gonna bite on. So, hope that helped some of you guys out. I might be giving away too much information in these videos, I don't know. But I appreciate you guys watching. I will be out on doing some kind of fishing here in the next week or so. I've actually had a day or two come up open, and I'm just gonna leave them open. I think I'm gonna go down and do some peacock fishing, because I'm gonna start booking trips in May and June for that. It's on fire down there right now, I've heard. I just haven't had time to take off the lake to go down there and fish it. But I think I'm gonna take a morning, go down there and do some fishing down there and show you guys kind of what the Everglades is like, catching the Oscars and the big panfish, the cichlids, and also just hopefully mauling the peacock bass. Hopefully that's coming. And then I got a couple tournaments coming up, and I hope I do have a couple days where I can go out and fish Okeechobee. Things are starting to change. The water's dropping, the temperatures are rising, or we'll probably get another front or two before true spring hits. But when it does, I really think it's going to, I think it's going to be a good one. So, appreciate you guys watching. Like and subscribe. Hope I didn't rant too long on this one. I appreciate all the positive feedback. I hope this answered a lot of the questions you guys had that have been asking me to touch on this topic. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Tight lines, guys.